Europe in Detail is all about exploring some of the more unique and maybe smaller and more intimate towns scattered across Europe. Maybe it's a natural or man-made wonder nearby that's drawing people to the region. Whether it's Italy, Spain, or now the UK, I really want to capture a vibe. For those of you who are lucky enough to have been travelling overseas, you'll know what I mean. These places have a very, very special vibe and feeling to them that is difficult to recreate in game. But nonetheless, we are trying in this series to do exactly that. And we've put a real emphasis on detail, hence the name of the series. And my main goal is to take you guys on a journey to these places as I build them. So how you doing, guys? I hope you are doing well. I am super stoked for today's episode. I get heaps done and it was an absolute blast. I do have to say, however, that the episode does move very quickly, and that is because I get limited amount of time with the building and editing these days, so I've got to move pretty quick. But I'm pleased to announce that today we are off to Wales. And if you don't know or you live under a rock, Wales is a country in the UK, the United Kingdom. And I have to admit, I didn't really know too much about Wales, probably about as much as the average person, but the more I looked, the more I fell in love with this place. So let's get to it and get started. One of the few things I did know about Wales was they have some amazingly beautiful coastlines. Pristine golden sand beaches with rugged cliffs directly next to them. It's just very iconic, I think. And whilst on my travels on GE, I found this cool little beach here, and for the life of me, I didn't want to try and pronounce this, but I'm going to. Is it won't? I don't know, man. If there's a silent letter, I'm really buggered there, but that's probably my best guess. But look at this beach. It's absolutely pristine. It's everything I explained before. But I think the main thing that caught my eye was just almost how perfectly square this beach is, and the fact that it's really in the middle of nowhere. We've pretty much just got a car park here and then this really cool track coming down to the beach. So let's have a go at making this in game. Now we're very much on the outskirts of the town here. I don't want to go any further out than this. I want to keep it close knit. We're going to try and achieve a combination of that isolated feel we're after, as well as having it on the outskirts of the town. And in terms of this being built in City Skylines, it's very easy. I just make a square beach with the terrain tool, add some headlands with the terrain tool also, and then just put cliffs around the edge of the terrain. This creates a look like the farmland just drops 100 odd feet directly down into the ocean with some really cool cliffs. Next I move on to adding a few decals, and I start with one of the big landscaping decals on the sea floor here as it gets shallower. It helps make it look really realistic. Then I want to add some of Ronda 69's awesome seafoam decals. They make the beach look really realistic, and that's exactly the look we're going for here. For some reason, I'm obsessed with trying to create waves in this game. I think that it would really take the realism to the next level, and I've probably spent 2 or 3 years actually trying to work this out, to the point where I've actually approached a couple of the asset creators to see if they could create some sort of wave, even if I could animate it with the procedural objects mod, but it sounds nigh on impossible, to be honest. So I'm going to do the next best thing that I can think of, and seeing as we're only really going to be looking at this area from a distance, then I think I might be able to pull this off. But basically, I'm using one of Ronda 69's seafoam decals, and I'm using the PO's module function, the back and forth one, to make it move into the beach very slowly. And I move it down far enough so it looks like it's just slipping into the sand. And it's not perfect, but I think it looks pretty cool. Let's move to a place in Wales called Greenbridge. This is from a region of Wales called Pembrokeshire, and this has some amazing cliffs in this region. And if you guys follow me, you know I'm a sucker for a cliff. So here we go. Let's build this in the game. And look at this one. This looks so cool. I love the way that we can clearly see the layers of the land exposed here. And picturing this in our little town, this could really be a point of difference, especially if we can add it in the right place. So in game, I'm using one of Grey Flame's awesome rocks, turned it to procedural objects, and I'm actually using the same rock for the entire rock structure here. I'm just manipulating the same rock very slightly every time I place it. And then it's about creating that arcing structure out into the sea. Now, if there's one thing I really wanted to nail with this, it was that showing of the layers that we seen. So once I'd got the basic shape, I went back, turned one of the rocks on a little bit of an angle, and then sort of overlaid it over it to create those layers. Once I was happy with how all of that looked, I sort of transitioned the area out from those cliffs and into Avanya's rock props. And it's quite amazing how the two of these complement each other, to be honest. You'll see that I've also added Avanya's rock props around where that big rock structure we built meets the sea. And it just really adds so much. It really is just unbelievable how realistic they look. And we move from one cool unique build to another. Let's move out offshore here about 2 kilometers in game. We are going to build a lighthouse here for our fishing village based on one called the Smalls Lighthouse from Wales. And this is pretty unique because it's got a helipad on the top of it, and that's the only way that the lighthouse keepers can get to and from the lighthouse from the mainland. But being honest with you guys, what drew me to this lighthouse, because there was a few I could have taken inspiration from, was this really cool story that I read about it as I was researching. Actually, cool might not be the right word, but I'm gonna tell the story anyway. So back in the 1850s, I think it was, there was 2 lighthouse keepers working in a really stormy night, and one of the waves from the storm actually killed one of the lighthouse keepers in the top room of the lighthouse. Now, remembering that they're 31 meters above sea level here, that is one pretty freaking serious storm. But anyway, as you could imagine, rescue conditions were impossible. So the chap left up there that was alive had to sit rather uncomfortably with his dead co-worker for a while, and things got a little bit smelly, so he decided to hang the corpse outside the lighthouse. And the first thing the rescuers seen was a body hanging outside the lighthouse which looked like it was waving for help. So it actually aided in him, the living lighthouse keeper, being rescued, which I thought was really crazy. And being honest, as soon as I heard that story, I kind of knew that this was the lighthouse I was going to use. So as you guys have seen, it's been really easy to build it. I found this really nice one here on the workshop, added a helipad to the top and put it on a rock. That is literally all I've done. But sometimes keeping things simple is definitely the way to go. I know we're moving really fast, guys, and I do apologise for that, but now we're going to zoom in and start detailing and working with what we've built so far. I'm hoping this will immerse us a bit further in what you feel like you may have missed out on. After all, this beautiful terrain is only beautiful if people can get down here and see it, and that's going to be our main focus here. At least with this first part, we're going to give access down onto the beach, and we're also going to create a little bit of a car park here. So the first thing I need to do is create a T on the end of this road so that it comes down to where we want it, and then move things out of the way. Most of the things I need to move are like trees and prop bushes and grass. Once I've got a nice clear patch to work with, I can start getting the main things down, and of course the first thing is going to be the car park. Now in terms of the car park, I really want to try and make this as informal as I possibly can. So there's no arrows on the road directing you where to go, there's no perfect gates or fences around the place, and there's certainly no parking wardens or parking gates on entry. This car park is most certainly representing a rural car park. It's the law of the land out here pulling in and out of this place. And we're going to see things like dirt and sand on the car park. The pavement's going to be really damaged, and we're going to see lots of foliage growth in and around the car park as well. And I have to say that a car park is probably the most least exciting thing I could think of when it comes to City Skylines, but this is also a good example of what I'm trying to achieve with this series. We may have a car park here that has more character than some large cities, and I guess that beauty's in the eye of the beholder, of course, but the way that nature's just left to creep in here, and more so maybe the fact that it's been able to and left to, I think it just really creates like a respect for nature and like a happy middle ground, you know, like an acceptance that we live alongside nature. And when we really do that, we can see how beautiful it really is. Like, look at this car park. Before I put any of that grass around, it was nothing. And now, all of a sudden, you know, I want to go there. I want to go and hang out. It's got character. That's right. You'll just see Dirty H hanging out in random car parks if they're beautiful. Anyway, let's move on to getting this usable path down onto the beach. We're going to have some entertainment services that draw citizens down onto the beach, so I need this path going down. And I've used Terra networks here to get the terrain in the shape that I need to run this path down. And before I make the concrete path invisible, I want to detail around it. That way I know exactly where the citizens are walking before I make it invisible. And all I'm doing here is really putting bushes and grass off that trail. So it looks like the trail is maintained, just being sand or dirt from foot traffic. There was no way I was going to build this beautiful arch in our town and have no way for the citizens to come down and enjoy it on the beach. So you can see here I've extended the concrete path from the one we brought down the hillside from the car park right underneath the arch here. And I'm going to very strategically place an entertainment cube into the cliff to draw people down and along this path. Then I can use the spawn points mod to move the spawn point for the services back up to the road. And I'm hoping that people just look like they're standing underneath the arch getting a good view, taking photos or just whatever. And I want as many people walking across our beach as I can possibly get, so I extend the path over to the other side and do the same thing into the cliffside over there as well. And the beach looks really cool later on with people just casually walking around up and down and enjoying the views. Now speaking of views, I want to move back up and where we're going to put a few buildings. And this is in the area where we teed that road off at the very beginning of the detailing. So I just mentioned we're going to have a few buildings here, but they're all going to sort of center around the terrain here. And you can imagine we're going to have a lot of tourists in this area because of the beach in general. So I figure there'd be like a viewing platform or something of the like up here with a really good view of our stone arch from above. And because that's the priority, that goes in first. Then we're going to add these buildings in around this T intersection, and we're going to make a very small village here. I'm going to try and make it as Welsh as I possibly can, but in all honesty it doesn't really look that much different from the UK. There is a couple of things I did notice, but we're going to get into those a bit later in the episode. One of the buildings you've seen me put down here is a pharmacy, and that may seem a little bit odd in this sort of location of our town, but this is actually the only Welsh building I could find on the workshop after about an hour and a half of scouring. So regardless of it being a pharmacy, that's got to be the first one I put down shortly. And the rest of this sort of intersection is mostly commercial, light commercial. There's a pub here as well I put in called the Black Horse, and then we're going to slowly transition away from here into residential buildings. And a couple of those residential buildings are right here next to our viewing platform, and you could imagine the view from their backyards is pretty amazing. So I want to add a little bit of detail here, but very simple detail to be honest. I'm just adding a fence around a small backyard, adding some cobblestones, and then mainly just flower gardens. Also, the back of the pub over here I want to add to. I add my own tables, I flatten it out a bit, and eventually I'll add a little bit of a roof over it and make it a bit more custom. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but there really isn't much that separates Wales in terms of building infrastructure from, say, England, from what I've seen anyway. Please, by all means, if you know more than I do and I'm wrong, write it in the comments, because I'd love to know if there really is a difference in the building infrastructure. But from my observation on Google Earth at least, one thing I did notice was that some of these roads in the smaller villages were like hoops or semicircles, and they were very symmetrical to each other, and it looked sort of very different from all the spots in England I'd looked at, so that's what I've sort of choose to build here. This is going to be the main part of our Welsh part of the build, and it is going to be based around these hooped typed roads, and I'm so glad I built these because I reckon they look great. But, and this might be familiar, I've created myself a bit of a challenge because it's difficult to fit some of these roads, or sorry, some of these buildings to these roads now that they're curved. The majority of these buildings I'm placing down are designed to go on square or close to square or straight roads, but that's just another challenge along the way, and eventually I find the appropriate sort of houses to fit in. We've got some old stone ones, we've also got some sort of duplex style flats, and aside from putting these buildings down, we're really not going to go much further in this episode, because what I didn't tell you guys is we have a part 2 of this episode where I take on a bit more detailing of what we've built, and we build a little bit more. So hopefully you've enjoyed our introduction to Wales, and I might see you in the next episode.